I mean, to get an American to highlight this problem and bring it into the global consciousness, I mean, I think Elon Musk has done a service, actually, I would say, to the UK, really. And I do hope that this cleansing, and I call that cleansing, really produces results, because perpetrators, you have to make examples of perpetrators. Police and the law enforcement authorities have systematically lived in denial or refused to carry out proper investigations because of the ethnicity of the perpetrators, largely people from other countries in the subcontinent, who were the women, young, who were also exploited, and or attempts were made, and they were mainly from other faiths. I think we should object, because I don't know, there may be an odd Indian or a Bangladeshi or whoever else, but it's mainly Pakistani. And we must call them out openly so that they're shamed, their community is shamed, and their community leaders take corrective action. I think the sort of support that the UK lends to Pakistan bilaterally, even today, and the fact that there is a vote bank, a sizable vote bank that votes collectively, depending on what the teachings of, or the fatwa issued by the Maulvi from the mosque, they vote accordingly. So I think they realize that. So they do not want to annoy that constituency beyond a point, that you cannot be politically correct and expect proper action to be taken. Because if that had been so, then by now you would have had thousands and thousands of prosecutions, indictments, and imprisonment. But the record is very patchy and very poor 40 or 50 years after these incidents have been, or since these incidents have been occurring. But to get some sort of closure, not complete closure, but some sort of closure, they need to, the cases have to be reopened. Cases that are live have to be speedily investigated, and those responsible must pay the price.
You're with StratNews Global, and I'm Ketki Angre. You're watching The Gist. It's a story that has perplexed me, confused me, and definitely enraged me. But it's also a story that is from the United Kingdom, and in many ways, I find unexplained. And to put all of that into context and make some sense of it, we're being joined by Yash Sinha, who is India's former High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. Thank you so much for joining us on Strat News Global.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you for having me on your show.
So I want to set the context first. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom said that there will be a national inquiry into the grooming gangs. Now, this is not a new thing, but it's bewildering that it's taken them so long to acknowledge something that was being said for decades.
Katie, to put this in context, you see, as you correctly said, it's a problem that has occurred and continues to occur for decades. In fact, if I recall correctly, uh, Professor Alexis Jay, in her report of 2014, talks about systematic exploitation of young girls by these grooming gangs. And it even gives statistics, if I remember correctly, it talks about Rotherham, and in the period in the last century, actually, uh, I think she talks about 1,400 cases, which was just a tip of the iceberg. So it's been happening for, I would dare say, the last 50 years or 40 years. And the sad part is that this is a shame, I think, happening in a country like the United Kingdom, an advanced democracy, and such a exponent or proponent of human rights all over the world. I think it's been happening in their backyard. And when you examine why this has persisted for so long, it's because they have lived in denial. I mean, Baroness Casey's audit report talks about a whole chapter is devoted on denial. And that's exactly what happened. And it's no, it's easy to blame the conservative or the labours. I think whoever ruled United Kingdom in these last 4 decades or wherever, they are responsible because, and of course the police, definitely, the law enforcement authorities, because there's been a systematic denial. And what is that denial? That is something that we need to see. The denial is basically the, I mean, I don't know what's the requirement, for lack of better words, to be politically correct. I think it's nonsensical because you refused to reveal the ethnicity of the people. And let's be clear, there was one ethnicity involved. I mean, there may have been one or two others, but the main perpetrators in 99.9% of the cases were Pakistani origin people. And they refused to call it out. They refuse. And why did they refuse to call it out? You and I are live in a democracy, so we know the compulsions of democracy. But then the compulsions of vote bank politics should not be allowed to prevail over justice. And for such a heinous crime, I mean, I was seeing something last week on one of the TV channels in the UK that even today this continues. And I think there were mention of three councils where there's been a disproportionate number of cases recently, 2023 or whatever. So I think whether it's Rotherham, whether it's Derbyshire, whether it's any place, I mean, Bradford, places in Leeds, I mean, name
Rochdale.
it, the West Midlands, Manchester, wherever there is a large concentration of Pakistani or Mir Puri origin people, this has occurred. But not only there, it has occurred in other counties, in other regions also. So this is something that, in fact, you needed Elon Musk to
Yes.
call for a national inquiry. And everybody at that time said Elon Musk is interfering, he is right wing, whatever. But look what the outcome is. Hear Baroness Casey speak about, what has happened, or read Alexis Jay's report. I think it's a shame, and I'm happy that, reluctantly or otherwise, the government now in the UK has decided to come up with a national inquiry. Of course, what that national inquiry will do and conclude is, of course, it's a foregone conclusion. But what action, what remedial action has the government taken? And what more it can do is going to be, I think, the main focus of this inquiry.
How do you explain what is a grooming gang? Because the name is very different from what it actually does. So what do grooming gangs do?
You see, that's again a matter of interpretation. But as I understand it, grooming gangs are people with a warped mind, obviously, who are sexual predators, who get together and either entice young girls, not adults, pre-adults, minors, mainly white women, entice them into having to sort of uh, raping them. I mean, that's the clear this thing, raping them or enticing them and having sort of relations with them under inducement. But mainly it was forced in most cases. And I think it is a sorry state of affairs that the people, and it was well known, the newspapers, the media talked about it, but it was always kept under the lid in the sense that they wouldn't name them as wouldn't call them out as Pakistanis. Alexis Jay's report does do it, and you know the reason why. The reason why I referred to it, because in the areas that I had mentioned earlier, north of Birmingham, there are large concentrations, pockets of Pakistanis. And when I was there were 11 Labour MPs of Pakistani Mir Puri origin. But that was some years ago. I don't know what the current statistics are from that region. So can you imagine whether, for instance, the Labour government would not do something that would annoy these 11 or 12 MPs and the larger Pakistani origin population? So you must also understand it in the context of the bilateral relations and the history. I mean, we all know that Pakistan was midwifed by the British. It was an artificial construct, really, and the British have sort of supported them right through. Even today, I recall I think it was a year ago, 2 years ago, in the UN Security Council. They wanted a discussion on Kashmir. Fortunately, that didn't go anywhere. But I think the sort of support that the UK lends to Pakistan bilaterally, even today, and the fact that there is a vote bank, a sizable vote bank that votes collectively, depending on what the teachings of, or the fatwa issued by the Maulvi from the mosque, they vote accordingly. So I think they realize that. So they do not want to annoy that constituency beyond a point.
Right. And it's actually devastating to even hear Baroness Casey talk about it, because there was so much of what she said that is not new. I mean, she had to repeat it multiple times over. It was not, they were not taking cognizance of it, and they came up with this construct of an Asian umbrella. And that, in a way, was a way to hide the ethnicity of the maximum perpetrators in these parts. And that's also something that has now been is being talked about. If you could talk a little bit about how, they didn't want to sound racist, and that's why they made this umbrella name called Asian, when that's really not the truth again.
Ketki, I mean, you have to see it in the larger context. You heard the term in the United States, for instance, called Asian Americans. It's a joke. Asia is the largest continent in the world. Initially, Asian Americans comprised those from East Asia. Now, reluctantly, they have started including people from our part of the world. In that, when I read studies about Asian Americans doing very well in the United States, you see, the Korean, the Chinese, and then of course now the Indians are overtaking everyone. So suddenly Indians have been brought in. So I'm giving this example because this is what, when you try to be politically correct, you try to be woke, then this is what happens. Now, in the UK, they're using the word Asian again. They're not saying, sometimes they say South Asian. I think we should object because I don't know, there may be an odd Indian or a Bangladeshi or whoever else, but it's mainly Pakistani. And we must call them out openly so that they're shamed. Their community is shamed and their community leaders take corrective action. After all, it's not just the police, it's not just the law enforcement authorities, it's the way, the milieu that you have been brought up in that treats young girls like that. And they see, especially white girls, as prey. Are they trying to change the population balance? I wouldn't go that far. I really wouldn't want to venture that far. But there seems to be a method in what they're doing, and what that method is, I don't know. Perhaps the police authorities. Well, I remember in areas like Bradford, I had read somewhere that even the police are afraid to go in, and they're in certain areas they want Sharia law, etc. So that's something entirely different. What I'm trying to say, coming back to the subject, is that you cannot be politically correct and expect proper action to be taken. Because if that had been so, then by now you would have had thousands and thousands of prosecutions, indictments, and imprisonment. But the record is very patchy and very poor 40 or 50 years after these incidents have been, or since these incidents have been occurring.
And like you said, these are girls who are white. So the victims in this, I mean, in fact, we should be calling them survivors in this, who are all white. They come from white backgrounds. And in almost all cases, their perpetrators are, and we are not calling it the Asian term, they are Pakistani men. And these men identified these women, preyed on them. They have talked about gang rapes, they have talked about inducements, they've talked about feeling completely alienated, they've talked about being imprisoned in homes where, in fact, in one of the stories that I was reading, there was a list of men. And if they had used that halfway house or whatever that was, they would tick at the end of it after they had abused these girls. And some of them, they were not believed. They went to the cops didn't want to do anything about it. And there has been the systematic and systemic denial, like you pointed out, of this even happening. And there is now also another connection and link that we see. The current Prime Minister of the United Kingdom was the chief prosecutor of for the Crown at that time. And there's also those linkages that are now being made about whether this is now just inconvenient and it's so big now it can't be ignored.
I wouldn't want to go into the record of the current Prime Minister when he was Director of Prosecution, because I really don't know, frankly. Yes, he was, and he's the best person to speak about his record. But one thing I would like to say, where you mentioned that they are mainly white women, yes, actually, the recorded cases are mainly of white women, but I am aware that this also happened to other South Asian women. I mean, women from South Asia. And I'm using the word South Asia because I don't include Pakistanis there. I mean, I don't include the victims being Pakistanis. They were people from other countries in the subcontinent who were the women young who were also exploited, and or attempts were made, and they were mainly from other faiths, so I'm aware of such cases. There may not have been as many as the cases of white, and certainly they weren't reported because there's certain shame in our society about reporting such things. They were always sort of brushed under the carpet, and the girls married off or whatever. You know how it is in our system. So there are cases there also, and I don't think this. I mean, if this inquiry reveals that such cases, that will be of benefit to every society, because they'll get a proper picture of what actually happened. But I suspect that may not happen. But I'm aware of such cases because such cases were reported in the past also.
One of the things that strikes anyone who reads about this is that just that these girls and their families were not believed. Uh, it's it's a terrible indictment of the society too. It's not just the politicians, but the fact that there are so many young girls who they have basically completely ignored and said that they have no agency and they are not to be believed.
I don't want to. That's a very sensitive subject. I mean, I read somewhere that some cases where there was consent involved. Now, what is consent? Can a 13-year-old, is she, or 12-year-old, or 11-year-old, is she legally of a sound mind where she can give her consent? Was it under the influence of, you know, alcohol, drugs, whatever, or simply brainwashing? One doesn't know. So I'm not the expert. I wouldn't want to go into it. But certainly there will be inducements, and the police and the law enforcement authorities have systematically lived in denial or refused to carry out proper investigations because of the ethnicity of the perpetrators largely, and also perhaps because of other societal reasons, which I'm sure if you are reading of Professor Jay's report and Baroness Casey's, this report brings that out. I saw her interview the other day on one of the TV channels, Baroness Casey, and I was really touched. I mean, it sort of evoked a sort of emotional chord in me because she was really emotional about the whole thing, and obviously she's seen it, studied it in detail. So I think it's a dark chapter, I think, which needs to be addressed immediately. The only silver lining, as I see it, is the system, the British system, that allows even something that has been buried for many years to be then again sort of revived, and to look. Of course, there is a national outcry and a debate. I saw the exchange between the Prime Minister, not one, but more than one exchange, the Prime Minister's questioner with the leader of the opposition. But beyond that, I mean, to get an American to highlight this problem and bring it into the global consciousness, I mean, I think Elon Musk has done a service, actually, I would say, to the UK, really. And I do hope that this cleansing, and I call that cleansing, really produces results, because perpetrators, you have to make examples of perpetrators. You cannot sort of shy away from doing that. And the minute you do that, they feel that they can get away with it, and then they act with impunity.
So that's actually my last question to you, that what would be closure for the families and justice for the victims? Because even though a national inquiry has been announced, to what extent would justice be served, and in what manner?
No, in such cases, justice will never be served fully. I mean, I'm talking about the satisfaction of the victim or their families. It can never be done. It's obvious, but it would be of some solace to them if the perpetrators are punished, they called out, shamed, and punished. And there must be a deterrent punishment awarded to them. And even if the cases are old, if there is enough evidence, the courts of law must and should convict them to make an example of, that. Now, again, that is up to the courts of law and the evidentiary value. So again, I won't want to venture into that. But to get some sort of closure, not complete closure, but some sort of closure, they need to. The cases have to be reopened. Cases that are live have to be speedily investigated, and those responsible must pay the price. I mean, I think that's the only way I think that some amount of closure will come for the families and the victims of these shameful incidents.
Nora, thank you so much for your time. We do want to play out some of the bites that have come in from the families of the survivors, and that's exactly what they are hoping for: justice in whatever manner, acknowledgement of what they've been through, and the fact that they want to see those who did this to their daughters pay a price in some way.
Social workers and the police, the ones who didn't protect her, the ones what I was screaming at, asking them to support me, because I held my hands up. It was so difficult at the time that I couldn't look after my own daughter. I was a single parent on my own, and social services got me suspended from work for trying to keep my daughter in the house. It was so difficult. So Scarlett was groomed from 14 to 18, from 16 to 18. One of my big things out of this inquiry is about holding professionals accountable, and that doesn't reassure me one little bit.
I don't think anyone's ever going to deny that, but we cannot change that now. We can change the future. I think all the political stuff needs to be put aside now. This needs to be focused on survivors, and the government need to do a lot of work to rebuild up trust from services, and for the victims to be able to trust to come forward, to be able to open up and be able to engage in an inquiry.
For such insightful discussions, keep watching StratNews Global. Make sure you like and share our videos, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel.